What is up, fellow carnivores or would-be carnivores or fellow Homo sapiens? Today's video is about fasting. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You hear fasting, intermittent fasting, short-term, meal timing, time-restricted feeding, long-term fast. There's just a lot here, and there's a lot of confusion, of course. Anything in nutrition at this point is just completely and utterly confused because you have people that go online and pretend to be an expert and talk about things or whatever, and there's not enough focus on the basics. What things are we talking about here? And that's why I like the ancestral approach, because if you really boil it down to the first principles that we know for sure, things that are for sure, that are irrefutable, and the ancestral lens helps us do that. We know there wasn't food invented the way it is today 10,000 plus years ago. We know before 10, 12,000 years, we weren't farming. We know that for the bulk of human existence, about 200 to 300,000 years, we lived as hunter-gatherers with a lot of our calories coming from animal sources and some calories coming from plant sources. And we also know that there are certain peoples that have been observed in more modern times, which isn't an exact representation of pre-agriculture, but it does give us a glimpse into the amount of plants that we're eating at different equators. There's a lot here that we can reason up from, and that's what I want to do with fasting. And so let's just real quick drop everything that we think we know about fasting, intermittent fasting, anything like that. And let's talk about why is it beneficial? Why is it actually good for the human organism? Like, why is that? It's because our ancestors lived in an environment where they had to go and acquire food from nature. And as you know, if you've ever been camping or anything, food isn't just laying around on silver platters. You have to go and you have to find it. You have to track it. You have to hunt it. You have to kill it. You potentially have to dig it out of the ground. You have to process it. You have to cook it. A lot goes into it. It's not like today where food is literally everywhere. Like within 15 feet, there's a fridge over there. I can go get food. That is not the way our ancestors lived. And thus, it is not what our biology adapted to. Our biology adapted because we moved to the top of the food chain and we're the most successful species on planet Earth as of right now. I mean, aside from maybe tardigrades or maybe cockroaches are more successful. Bear with me. We're the most successful dominating species on the planet. If we didn't figure out a way, if Mother Nature didn't program our biology through literally hundreds of thousands of years and then millions of years of evolution before that to be able to go periods of time without food, we would have died off a long time ago. Because again, food is not always available in the wild. It's not always consistent. The quantities will fluctuate. The foods available will fluctuate. Foods will be available at certain times of the year and then not available at certain times of the year. Everything is explained when we look back to our ancestral past. The reason that people get such great results on a lot of the diets today is because they're removing a lot of those man-made foods. And the reason that intermittent fasting specifically helps people get results is because it mimics what it was like for our ancestors living in the wild, which is what our biology is made for. It is made for that. People still ignore this. They just like stick their head in the sand. These are one of those things that is just irrefutable. You can't deny this. And you hear people say, show me the research. I had some guy on Instagram yesterday going off and like showing me the research about my claim that sugar is basically poison and killing people, right? Heart disease, cancer, 2 killers in the US. Sugar is directly correlated to that, like one of the primary drivers even. And he's saying, show me the research. There's no research that says this. The research doesn't support it. And without going on a huge rant here, I basically was like, there's basically no nutrition research that's good. We can throw it all out and then we can go down to the basics and we can look at other things like the fact that most people consume 130 pounds of sugar a year. Our rates are rising. As people have actually reduced meat consumption, disease has still risen. So we've debunked that fat hypothesis and meat hypothesis. I know it's about fasting. I know. Let me try to get back on point. Let me think. Where was I? So there's really 3 ways I want you to think about fasting, and I want you to start doing with your fasting routine. And it's something that I need to do more of. 3 ways to think about this. We have the ancestral understanding of why fasting, intermittent fasting, long-term, short-term, meal timing, why these things are good for us, right? We don't need to get into the biology. We don't need to get into the fact that it helps regulate hormones, that there has been a lot of research around fasting. It's almost all ubiquitously positive because, again, it's mimicking our past. We understand that controlling food consumption and not just stuffing our face all day, every day is good for our biology. That's pretty obvious. But there's a few ways to do that. I think about 3. You don't see anybody, I've literally never heard anybody talk about this. For our purposes, because you're probably interested in carnivore, doing carnivore something. I mean, it's going to be applied to any diet though. I want you to think about 3 different ways of fasting that best mimic what it was like for our ancestors living in the wild. The first one is no animal foods. This could be you don't eat any food at all. Or it could be you only eat something like maybe some raw dairy, and then maybe if you're doing plants or flexible carnivore, whatever it is, you have some plant foods. So that would be no animal foods whatsoever, because this is a first principle. Our ancestors did not have fridges or food processing or manufacturing so that they could always eat a steak every single meal. Now, that doesn't mean that eating steak every single meal is necessarily bad. This is where it gets murky because people want these hard and fast rules. You could probably do just fine eating steak every single meal for your whole life. Like, yeah, but you will do better if you sometimes don't eat a steak every single meal or any animal whatsoever, because your ancestors, my ancestors, would not have eaten a steak or animal protein every single meal. This is like fasting is good for you, do these things, but this is like deeper how to think about this more and how to optimize this more. I've thought about this for a long time now. Every time I'm sitting down to have my protein-rich meal, my animal-based meal, sometimes full carnivore, I'm thinking to myself, well, I wouldn't have done this every day. And when I say I wouldn't have, I mean my ancestors. And they wouldn't have done it every meal, like 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day. Like, that's just insane. I mean, we probably would have been closer to an OMAD style of eating, which again is like, it's 24-hour fasting, and it's actually something I'm probably going to experiment with. But we wouldn't have been able to choose to have protein every single meal, every single day. Our ancestors would have done it if they could, but they didn't. They couldn't. And our biology is a result of the mass amount of time that they were doing that. So that's why it's one of these things that I think everybody should experiment with. There is some research around protein fasting. I don't know if it's good or not. I've just heard it cited, and it made sense to me when I thought about it, because we wouldn't have always been successful hunting. You can observe any hunter-gatherer society ever, and you can see that maybe beside the Plains Buffalo Indians that basically hunted the buffalo to extinction, they could have maybe had meat every single day for long periods of time. But I suspect that they still could have gone periods of time, maybe if it was like a few days a year or a few weeks or a few months at different times or whatever, I do suspect there would have been times when they couldn't have eaten animals at all. So this is one of the ways I want you to think about fasting that you could maybe work into your routine. Don't have any animal proteins in a day, or, a meal even. Like, you can obviously take this to like different degrees. You can go 3 days without animal proteins or any food. You could go 1 day, you could go 1 meal. The second thing to try, and this will be maybe a little bit controversial because most of my audience now is carnivore friendly or pro or whatever. You could try plant only, right? And this could coincide with no animal proteins, and then you could replace that with just plant foods. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because this is just like a personal thing. You don't have to do this. You can ignore this completely if you want. But again, we're trying to think back ancestrally. What would our ancestors have done? If they couldn't get animal foods, they would have defaulted to any food they could have had, and that might have been leaves, berries, twigs, tubers, etc. And there's actually a good quote here. I don't remember when it was, but it was an anthropologist that was studying hunter-gatherers, and he asked them something to the effect of, it was about their diet, or like, do you eat plants, or do you like plants, or something like that. And the hunter-gatherer basically said, we will eat plants when there's not real food available. And that's obviously a rough translation. They would eat plants, but they're not their ideal food stuff. And this is absolutely what I believe to be a first principle of human health and longevity, and why I think like a mostly carnivore diet is the best thing for humans. And there's a reason for that. Plants don't taste good for a lot of reasons. Sometimes they're toxic, sometimes they have to be prepared, and they just generally don't have the nutrition our body needs. And so Mother Nature programmed humans to want meat and salt and fat because that's where the nutrition is. You could try sometimes to do only plants, and this could be something like minor. I mean, maybe you have like some weak salad greens that are like 99% water, maybe some cucumber or something like that. If there's certain plant foods that you can tolerate and you are doing carnivore or flexible carnivore, you could maybe try some meals where you do something like that. I like something with avocado and then maybe some berries, and sometimes I'll do like some cucumber without the skin and some olive oil maybe, and then some salt, and that's like a pretty tasty meal with a good amount of calories and a lot of water, etc. And so I need to do meals like that sometimes where I'm not going to have any steak or any protein or fish or anything, and I'm going to have that meal. And that meal is going to have a lot of satiety. It's not going to have a ton of calories, and it's still going to have energy that my body needs. Now, the third way to think about fasting is no food at all for pretty much as long as you can go. Multi-day fasts, extremely beneficial. And there's a reason, because it would have been something our ancestors had to deal with. And if we didn't adapt, if we didn't find ways to adapt to stressors, we would have died off long ago. And you can actually look at a lot of these things as positive stressors, just like exercise is good for the body. You're tearing muscles down. You're literally breaking your body apart so that it can rebuild to be stronger. Fasting is the same thing. The 3 buckets that I want you to start thinking about as you incorporate fasting or time-restricted feeding into your window are sometimes no animal protein whatsoever. And that could either be replaced with vegetables or plants or something like that, like certain ones, or it could just be no food at all. And then plant only. You could try that if you want to. You don't have to, right? But it is an option and it is ancestrally appropriate. And then no food at all, ideally for like 1, 2, 3 days. And if you're going to do long-term fast, like you probably want to talk to a doctor, especially if you're on medication or anything like that, or if you've never done it, maybe consider upping your electrolytes, more salt, etc. This isn't medical advice or nutrition advice, blah, blah, blah. It's just my opinion. Those are the ways that I think we need to think about fasting more often, instead of just saying it's this way, it's only 18-6, it's only OMAD, it's only multi-day fast, or you have people that try to hate on fasting and say things about or whatever, but that's all nonsense. Fasting is the first principle of human biology. We know that because, again, we're going down to the basics, the things we know for sure. Our ancestors would have gone periods of time without food. They would have gone periods of time without animal foods. They would have gone periods of time probably without plant foods, especially if they had a lot of animal foods. And they would have gone periods of time without any food. So take from this what you will. Find ways to maybe test, tweak, optimize, and mix things up. And the last thing that I want you to keep in mind, without a doubt, our ancestors would not have sat down and had breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day of their life. And I guarantee you, we don't have the data. We can't say this for sure, but I guarantee you that the typical 2-3 square meals a day, even the 1 meal a day, the 1 square meal a day, every day without fail, your whole life, will make you more fragile. You will probably pay a health cost for it. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, that we've fallen into this rigid dogma around food and eating, and this idea that it's supposed to happen every single day and that's just normal. I think even that we need to fight against and find ways to mitigate, because our ancestors would have not eaten food every single day. They just wouldn't have. That's it for today's video. Let me know what you think about this. This is a huge topic with a lot of different rabbit holes to go down. If you have any specific questions, comments, or recommendations, or things that you've learned about this or things you've tried, please share it below, because other people watching this video will get benefit from that. I'll see you in the next one. Hey, Colin here. Got a freebie for you. Click on the button below to go to the ancestralmind.com and download the 7 Principles of Living Wild. This is a short PDF that's got some of the main principles, such as real food, sleep, movement, and a couple more that are going to help you live more ancestrally in accordance with your genes.